So today I want to speak about why I hated university and why it was one of the hardest periods of my life and why I don't suggest that anyone goes to university whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim. Um, so the first thing that I want to speak about is why did I actually go to university, and it's a very common story in my culture. Is that my parents never received a higher education, so they wanted me to go and receive the higher education because for them education is the most important thing in their life, which is partly true. For them, at least in their time, education is what takes you out of the third world country that you're living in, and it brings you to the United Kingdom, which is a first world country officially. But obviously, coming here, you face a bunch of new challenges, which I've experienced and my parents will never experience because they never grew up here. So that's the reason why I actually went to university. And part of it was because of the propaganda of school pushing you to go to university for their own betterment, just to say that this student went to this university and this student went to this university, because it makes the school look better. Um, so those were the two reasons why I actually went to university. Now I want to speak about my experience at university. So just a bit of background. I studied physics with astrophysics at King's College, and I done that for 3 years. Um, so I want to talk firstly about a few Islamic points about why I really didn't like university at all. The first thing is that it damaged my Islam a lot, and I was exposed to this on the first days of university. Um, First of all, the first example I'm going to give is that I was looking for the prayer room, and then I asked someone who looked like a Muslim because at that time in my head every brown person was a Muslim. So I asked him, "Well, do you know where the prayer room is for Jummah?" And then what he said is that he didn't tell me this by the way, but he did. He said, "I'm just a Muslim by name, and I don't know where the prayer room is. I don't pray." Essentially, that's what he was basically saying. Okay, that kind of blindsided me. I was like, I was not expecting the answer, so you're no help, basically. And that was one of my first interactions with a Muslim. Um, so that essentially set the tone for the rest of my university life and why I really disliked it. So, as a Muslim, firstly, I want to say that when you're in university, you're exposed to so many different cultures, so many different people. Um, King's College London, personally, is a very internationally mixed university, which basically means that there's just a bunch of East Asian people. That's all it is because they pay the high tuition fees and then they come to KCL and then the university profits off them, and because their fees are about 30 grand a year, and the UK students, the British students are about 9k. So obviously they're profiting off the international students, which is why there's so many East Asian students. And if you see them, they're all wearing Gucci and they're all wearing Supreme, which I'm 90% sure they got from Guangzhou in China. That's where they make all the reps. Um, or they're actually rich, God knows. So this really damaged my Islam, and that's why I always felt like the prayer room was my sanctuary. But even in that sanctuary, um, this is where I was first exposed to Shia Muslims, because I saw them praying with a little clay circle, sphere, cylinder, and obviously they use this because they believe that you have to touch some form of earth because that's how to pray. You have to touch earth, which is incorrect, of course. But this is what they believe, and this was my first exposure, and I was very confused because I had previous knowledge, but when you actually see these things in person, it definitely leaves an imprint on you, and it makes you reflect on your position as a Muslim and what you've been taught. Also, another interesting one was that I was asking someone who was a Muslim, and I assumed was a Muslim, and he confirmed that he was a Muslim. So this wasn't like the other guy. So I asked him, okay, are you going to come Jummah? Me and this brother are going to Jummah. And then he said, no, he doesn't go to Jummah. So then we asked him, "You're Muslim, right? So why don't you go to Jummah?" And he said, "Because the Jummah prayer was not prescribed in the Quran." Um, so that was my first experience with a Quranist. And what these Quranists believe is that they only believe in the Quran and whatever the Quran says. They don't believe in the Hadith. They don't believe in the Sunnah, which essentially takes you out of the fold of Islam. So yeah, that was my first experience meeting a Quranist, which definitely these things they affect you mentally because you're being exposed to these new people. These next points are not inherently Islamic points. They're just some things that I found and why I didn't really like university. So coming, and this is something that you hear from a lot of people, is that when you come from your school, you are probably one of the smartest people, which is why you got into this prestigious university. But then when you come to university, you kind of start failing. And this is something that I experienced as well. I was never a top student, but I was in the top 5, top 10 students in my class. And then when I came to university, I was surrounded by a lot of people who are way smarter than me. One of my classmates, he actually competed in the National Math Olympics, which I never even knew was real until I searched it up, and then he told me that, yeah, he competed in that. So that was kind of crazy because he was from Japan, and obviously when you're in Japan, they have a very high standard of education, and he was from a private school, so even a higher standard. So the next point is student debt. I don't think that this is an Islamic point, that you don't want to put yourself into thousands of pounds of debt, and that's pretty self-explanatory. The next thing is an Islamic point, is free mixing. Like I said before, because you're in a mix of all these cultures, sometimes, and this is not to be discriminatory, it's not good for you as a Muslim to be free mixing with all of these non-Muslims. They're going to impact you more than you're going to impact them. You can't expect to change the society or people if you don't change yourself, especially if you're not praying 5 times a day, especially if you're not grounded. If you're going in there with your thobe and your shemar, yes, you'll probably make a statement, but it's very hard to change these universities, and they'll probably call you a jihadi, a terrorist or something like that. So in your best interest, it's probably better not to do that, because I saw a story about a brother who actually done that. Yes, it might help people, but at the same time, you're kind of posing a danger to yourself, because nowadays in the UK, it's getting very dangerous for a Muslim. But that's not to say that you should be scared. Now, finally, this is a really big point. I want to speak about immoral classmates. These classmates, they are so degenerate. They will do the worst things. They will do drugs. They will drink alcohol right before the lesson, and then they'll come in. And for me, this was probably the biggest culture shock, that this smart guy who I know competed in the National Math Olympics, you're telling me that he popped a pill the day before class and he drank, and he's still smart. This doesn't make sense. This goes against everything that I was taught. And that, these crackheads, which is what they are, is that they'll never get anywhere in life. But this kind of exposed me to the high functioning society of crackheads, especially later on in my life, where one of my friends went into banking, and he was essentially saying that a lot of these people, they do drugs on the weekends and etc etc. So this is the life of a non-Muslim, which I never knew anything about. I always felt like drugs are on one side, and your sanity is on the other side, which is how it is. But a lot of these people are very high functioning, and in their words, they will say that the drug makes them feel better. But for me, I thought it was always a clear black and white sign of that you do drugs and you're crazy and you're insane and you don't have any sanity. And then the other side is when you don't do drugs and you're mentally sane. But with these non-Muslims, they kind of blur the line. On the weekends, they go crazy and they party, which really means party and doing drugs and doing all these immoral acts. And then on the Monday to Friday, they come in and they try to study hard, which I think is a very horrible way to live. Yeah, no one should be living like that. It will destroy you mentally, and which is why a lot of these people are depressed. They're not happy with their life. Okay, so the final point, which I want to speak about, is this obsession with being smart. And this was before the word performative came into use. But oh my gosh, these people are the most performative people that you'll ever meet, and they're very pretentious. They think they're better than everyone else. They like to use big words and they like to confuse other people, just to make themselves feel like they're smart, because they'll never explain things to you in a simple manner. They will just explain it to you in a very tricky way, and they'll gaslight you. They won't show you any answers, they won't show you their notes. They gatekeep a lot for no reason. I don't think it affects people. They'll take pictures of the presentation and the whiteboard and they won't even send it to you, which is so weird to me. And that's something that I learned about the characters of these people in university. They don't care about anyone else except for themselves. So that's why for me, it was very, very hard to make friends, as a Muslim as well. Because I never had that open discussion with people. If I was speaking to people, it always felt like they were trying to gain something from me, or I always felt like maybe I was trying to gain something from them, which is not a good character trait for me and myself to have. So these are a few points of why I really didn't like university. I can always go into more detail. If you made it to the end, thank you for watching. And if you take anything from this, please don't go to university. In terms of a solution for that, go to an apprenticeship, get a job, develop some real skills, because all of that is just a fake bureaucracy, and a really bad meritocracy, which basically just means the school system is horrible, and that can be a whole video on its own. But yeah, thank you for watching.